Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Members of Ugandan Parliament who are here, my colleague, members of EALA, Commissioner Leo Jara and your team, and other commissioners who are here, Revenue Authority and the others. Jen Nalunga, the ED of SEATINI and your team. Members of civil society who are here, all of you distinguished participants. First of all, I want to thank SEATINI for thinking very, very proactively to have this afternoon meeting with us and the different stakeholders. And I hope that this will set the tone and guide us going forward, because this has been the missing link, a conversation between EALA, National Parliament, and the different stakeholders who are actively involved in the integration process in the East African community. And I think that this kind of conversation will inform policy, will inform further discussions that will feed into the broader narrative of how we as East Africans can work together for a more inclusive, a much more stronger East African community. And that's what we really expect. The colleagues that have spoken here and the opening remarks by Jen have triggered my thinking. And I think that I can only do justice to the topic that we members of EALA have been given if I talk about the politics of our integration and relate it to tax harmonization. And I'm going to do it from a very practical standpoint. So you'll find that my conversation is going to be heavily laced with the politics around the region and how it is impacting generally on our integration process. You know, a frog once lived in a pot, and all he could see a few stars, and imagine the world is really overrated. It's such a small thing. And then one day, the frog popped out of the pot, and he found that the world is actually so big. And that's when the frog began to have conversations with lizards, have conversations with the trees, with human beings and others on how they can live together. So context matters. And I want to delve into the contextual issues of EAC integration, and also to specifically position to put EALA in a position where we get to understand what it is capable of doing and what it is not capable of doing in the current EAC dispensation. I think that will allow us to interrogate this topic quite well and make this conversation have a positive traction in the direction that we would wish to have. The structure of this community is such that we have the legislature, which is the East African Legislative Assembly. We also have the East African Court of Justice, and we have Summit, and by extension, Council of Ministers. Now, this is almost this, it almost mirrors the same structure of the partner states in our Commonwealth systems. So you'll find that in Uganda, you still have a parliament, you have executive, and you have court. However, in terms of the functioning, there are functional differences because of contextual issues. I think in the formative stages, when we revived the EAC, the framers of the treaty of the EAC were cognizant of the failures, what haunted the other East African community. So they were driving the EAC agenda, but with handbrakes. So you know you are in this rally and you want to win the race, but you are a driver who is pedaling, stepping on the acceleration, but you also have your handbrakes on because you're a little bit cautious. So you are not going to, you're not going to win that race so easily. It's going to take some time. And if you delve deeper into why they did it that way, you will appreciate why. But 20 years down the road, I think it's time for us to begin to interrogate that particular elephant in the room that makes us, very, very gradual on matters that are even obvious to our integration. So you see that while we have the East African Court of Justice, and we also have EALA, and we have the executive, the way they function is different from the way the partner state organs of governance function. So EALA has three major functions. That is legislation, oversight, and representation. But in the context of the revived East African community that is governed by a treaty. It is governed by a treaty. Now, the three functions of EALA are all subject, and we always say that EALA's legislative function, because when you look at our role, whether it comes to tax, whether it comes to legislation, our role is shared legislation. We always say that our legislative function is a shared responsibility because as opposed to national parliaments, where a law is processed, you go through the initiation of the law, be it from the front bench of private members, and finally the assembly debates it after public hearings, and it is passed. It is considered by committees, brought for first, second reading, and it is passed. And eventually, such a law is subject to ratification. So it is taken to the executive, and in this case, Parliament debates it, and the president eventually signs. If the president doesn't sign the first time, it is brought back to Parliament for reconsideration. If he does it the second, he rejects it the second time, it is again brought back for reconsideration. It is done the third time, it becomes a law. That's an exception. For us in EALA, you cannot take that path. And I'm saying this deliberately. Once we pass a law, it is subject to ratification. The process of ratification is an elaborate process. You have to pass the ratification test in all the partner states. And that means that each partner state must consider that law within its own national context. That brings me to what initially Ambassador Irumba said here, that do we legislate for partner states or do we legislate for EAC? If indeed, in the wisdom of a regional assembly that is constituted by 54 members that come from the different partner states, this law passes the test and probably is a law that is demand-driven because civil society or our members of our citizens of East Africa have demanded, and it has passed. Then it means that it passes the test. All that requires is approximation of those laws in the national, in the different partner states. But that is not the case, because it has to pass a political test in the partner states. And because we have different political interests and priorities, sometimes legislation alone by EALA is not the panacea to a specific demand that comes from either the different institutions, either civil society or the other stakeholders. The reason I'm bringing you, I'm saying this is because, you see, if you take interest and go to Arusha and you look at the many legislations that we have passed, you will see that the bulk of the legislations that we have passed have actually not been ratified. The reason being that it can pass the test in 4 partner states and 2 others may not agree to it. And then the process continues and continues and continues. Unfortunately for EALA, we do not have a provision that if a particular law has not been ratified, maybe once or twice or 3 times, it automatically becomes law. No, because we are an intergovernmental organization. So EAC in its current formation is an intergovernmental organization, meaning that a lot of powers are still vested in the states that come together to form the East African community. So it's not like how the structures of our national governments function. It means that a lot of work, a lot of business is still vested in the state. And therefore, EALA and other organs of EAC have got to negotiate. So the operative word in our regional integration processes is actually negotiations. Because even if you take the path of saying, I want to take activism, I want to go into parliament and I'm going to say ABCD, it just stops there, because these states must all agree that this is the way forward. So the elephant in the room is actually on what we call consensus. The elephant in the room is consensus, and it is something that we are going to, we must continue to talk about. Now, we are talking about domestic revenue mobilization in the EAC and the role of EALA. I have given you the 3 functions that we as an assembly perform. That is legislation, oversight, and representation. I think that the colleagues that have talked here have actually variously touched on what perhaps even EALA has already done. For example, we have existing laws, regional laws. Whatever we pass at EALA are really regional laws. But those regional laws are subject to domestication. And that's the reason why, when this invitation was extended to us, in the conversations we said we needed to have members of Ugandan parliament here, and I'm glad that they are here, and you have invited actually the different heads of committees to be part of this conversation. Because there is nothing that we legislate upon that is not subjected to domestication. And the process of the domestication requires that the members of parliament in the partner states take interest, look at it, and amend, where possible, the local laws, the national laws, to be consistent with the regional legislation. So it is that very elaborate process of legislation that makes the works of the regional assembly a little bit difficult. But I could see from the presentations here that there's a lot of expectations that are placed on the regional assembly, and indeed rightfully so. Because if really our ambition is to have an East African community that is strong enough, an East African community that is capable of mobilizing the kind of resources that we have, then we must invest in the institutions that drive this process. And one of them is actually the East African Legislative Assembly, among others, to be able to speak, to be able to direct that agenda. Tell me your ambition and I'll tell you who you are. A World Bank expert went to, I think that was not Cameroon, the country next to Cameroon is which one? No, was it Gabon? Gabon, and asked them what they are. He says that for him, usually when he went to these developing countries, he sat with experts, Ministry of Education experts and so on, and the ministers, cabinet. And his first question usually is, what is your ambition in the next 20, 30 years? So he did ask that question. And they asked him to give them some 10, 20 minutes to talk about it because they needed to build consensus on what they wanted in the next 20 years. So they came with the answer. And their answer was that they wanted to be like Cameroon, their next door neighbor. When he checked the records of Cameroon, he found that Cameroon is a very poor country as well. But just imagine that Cameroon was better and was inspiring their neighbor. So it tells you that everything that those people are doing was to achieve the status of Cameroon, a poor country. Now, if we really are ambitious and want a region that is very strong, then we need to build institutions that reflect those ambitions. We need to legislate, pass laws that reflect those ambitions. We need to practice what can lead us to those ambitions. So when you talk about tax harmonization, it is that we must begin to detox ourselves of the sense of country first and region later. The very fact that we are going into regional integration means that we embrace the strength of our coming together and the opportunities that exist when we come together against the minimalist and short-term ambitions of a small country that cannot support its own economy. Now, we are having the issue of differences in our tax regimes. And indeed, as members of the Assembly, we have raised this a couple of times because we know very well that once you have a predictable tax regime, then you are an attractive destination for not only local investors, but also international investors. But if we are looking outward, and when we say we are looking outward, we are looking at third country, we're not looking at EAC, then there is a problem. So you'll find that at IALA, we have asked as many questions as possible to the executive. Now, the way we function, there are demand-driven issues, and there are also what we consider supply-driven issues. The supply-driven issues in our consideration are those that are presented by the executive, because that's their business. Their business is to see every day that they come out with legislation, because they are the executive. It's just like how our parliament here functions, where a cabinet has to sit and initiate legislation and influence the legislative agenda of parliament. Of course, we also have what we consider demand-driven. And demand-driven is where we get petitions, for example, from civil society organizations and any other concerned citizens of East Africa on a particular issue or a particular legislation that they feel is important to advance the interests of the community. Now, as members of the Assembly, we have done an excellent job of placing before the executive, and this is council of ministers that are vested with a lot of powers, as you've seen contextually, that actually the executive at the moment are the key drivers. They are in the cockpit of our integration. They are the real guys who are in the cockpit of our integration. The real pilots here are the summit members. Those are the real pilots. And the others who are assisting them are actually the executive members who are members of the council of ministers. So if you look at the structure of the architecture of our EAC, you will find that a lot of powers are vested in these two very powerful organs, and the rest of us facilitate that process. We facilitate that process. The work here is that we facilitate that process, but the real decision makers in the context of the current EAC dispensation are actually the summit and the Council of Ministers. So we have asked a lot of questions. Unfortunately, the element of political accountability is not explicit, and it's in the way the current formation of EAC. And this is very important for you, civil society, and for members of parliament in our national parliament. Political accountability is very critical if our integration is to gain positive traction. That somebody must be held accountable for the decisions that they take. That somebody must at all times feel that they are accountable to a certain constituency, and in this case, the East African citizenry. Now, there are no properly constituted organs or structure or something that can hold some of these very powerful organs accountable. There is no fear of loss. So, you know, in parliament, in our national parliaments, if you're in the executive, you will lose. If you make a mistake, they will move a vote of no confidence in you as a minister, and you are going to lose your office. That is not the space for EALA. You will be expecting too much if you think that an EALA members can censor a minister for not actually responding to these public interest questions, which are very critical to some of the issues that we are raising here, including the issue of domestic revenue mobilization. Because we know once we harmonize the different tax regimes, then we are enhancing our integration, and we are also enhancing the capacity of our of our governments to mobilize resources, because then you create an environment that will allow people to do business, and then the taxman can then generate more revenue. So there is that issue too. There are issues of compliance, because you see, we have existing laws. If it is just about laws, even the ones that we have are fairly sufficient. They have to be tested. They have to be tested. You can't say it's a bad law when you have actually not even tested them. So the levels of compliance in the different partner states is different. And why do we have differences in the levels of compliance? It's because there are still jurisdiction issues. The EAC is such that you still have, what do you call it? You still have, the partner states are still sovereign. So the question of sovereignty still exists. And that means that matters of compliance are left to sovereign authorities. So you do not have an EAC government that sits there and comes and says, why are you not doing this? Because EAC at that level is at a coordinating level. So matters of compliance are left to the sovereign institutions. And this brings me to the other point, that neighbors matter. Neighbors matter. In the case of Uganda, we are a land-linked country. We are a land-linked country. We are not landlocked, we are a land-linked country. Therefore means that a lot of our business depends on the business of our neighbors. How they conduct their business, how the government is structured, how their own predisposition to regional integration. That software is very important for us to have an efficient integration. And therefore, when it comes to matters of taxes, double taxes, and so on and so forth, that everybody, you are depending on the other party. So you'll find that Uganda, because it is very highly predisposed to this regional integration, its levels of compliance is fairly higher than other partner states. So the politics of our neighbors, the structure, the predisposition of our neighbors to regional integration is very critical. That means that these conversations should not just become conversations about taxes and so on. It should also be that we begin to provoke certain regional consensus around what works. So we need to build that minimum consensus on what can work in the interim as we drive this regional agenda and work with all the other partner states. These conversations must continue. Sometimes I think that it is not the lack of resources. It is just the lack of integrationists. Because even with the current legal regimes that we have not tested them. They are not, you know, let them, you do something, it fails, and then we interrogate it. But if you're not doing it, how are we going to know that doesn't work? So that's why you will find that when we talked about the double taxation agreements and so on, and we are still having this conversation almost 10 years down the road. 4 partner states are agreeable to it, 2 are not. What is it that takes you 10 years? What is it that takes you 10 years? You see, I don't think it's technical capacity. I think it is the political will. It is the ability to appreciate the big picture. And this is what EAC tends to, is all about, trying to subordinate the small picture to the big picture. So we need big picture thinking in our capitals in order to drive this, this process. We have been talking about how do we curb illicit financial flows in the EAC as a measure of domestic revenue mobilization. Because illicit financial flows, and you've seen from the statistics that we lose between 1 to 2 billion US dollars to illicit financial flows. 1 to 2 US dollars. And the industry that has the highest proclivity to illicit financial flows is actually the extractive industry. But how transparent are the governance issues around the extractive industry? That's the kind of conversation that we would want to provoke here. And I think I'm glad that we have the chair of the Natural Resource of our National Parliament here, that we need to have a conversation around our extractive industry and see how we can plug the loopholes that facilitate IFFs. Because these illicit financial flows is something that is invisible. You are not going to see it quite easily. They are highly technical areas. You know, somebody is going to do business, you can't take that person to any court because you can't be able to cite which laws. The person might be compliant to all the laws, but you are losing a lot of revenue. Now, we as a parliament passed a resolution in the recent assembly demanding that the different partner states interest themselves in IFFs, in illicit financial flows in the partner states, and try to make sure that we build capacity of particularly the extractive industry to deal with the illicit financial flows. That comes in terms of tax holidays, comes in terms of, you know, tax havens. So you find a company has registered, a parent company is in Holland, where it enjoys, it's a tax haven. And then it comes and registers a different name in Uganda and begins to do business in Uganda. And when the taxman says, now we want to come and tax you, they tell you that we spent 50% of our money to pay experts that were supplied by the parent company. We also had to pay royalties for the name that we're using, which is owned by the parent company, and so on and so forth. So by the time you are actually taxing, you're taxing a very small percentage of the revenue. The bulk of it has been shifted into the tax havens. You know, it's difficult for you to prosecute such a person. But then we need the capacity in those sectors for us to be able to investigate those sectors very, very well and be able to come up with a very strong law that can, safeguard us from IFFs. Just 1 second. Now, you see, our jurisdiction stops at the regional level. At the national level, we may have very little influence, if at all, because we members of IALA, we generate regional laws. We come up with regional policies, and then it is up to the institutions that are in the partner states to implement them. And ours is to do oversight. But we also only oversight regional institutions. We only oversight regional institutions. In this case, when we come for oversight function, say in Uganda, we are doing oversight in the East African Development Bank, which actually, even the East African Development Bank, we do not have jurisdiction over it. It is so protected. Yes, it's own independent law, even when it's called the East African Development Bank. So we have institutions like the Inter-University Council of East Africa and so on and so forth. CASOA, which is the aviation organization, so on. So those are the organs that we provide oversight over. But the other organs, for example, we can't come here and say we are going to Uganda Revenue Authority for oversight function. I think that would be overstepping our mandate. And Uganda Revenue Authority would only be courteous if they gave us, but because they are part of the East African Revenue Authorities, they find they are under obligation to provide us with information that empowers us to do our work effectively. So that role now is to the national parliaments. That's why the treaty says we have to work closely with the national parliaments, who then can do that role on our behalf. That means that we must win over our national parliaments to begin to think regionally on matters that affect our people. So it's not enough to say, Yala do this, Yala do this, Yala do this. There is a huge role that the national parliaments do in order for us to be effective as regional legislators. For example, right now, Uganda's domestic revenue mobilization target is, I think, at 18% of GDP. I think that's what was captured in National Development Plan. We are at 13 at the moment. We are 13 or 16, 13.5. And we are moving into, our ambition is to go into 18. And yet, at the same time, the leakages are so high because you see, while that is our ambition, we are also treading closer to our debt levels. You see, so we have also a fairly high debt level, although ours is still manageable. But in the region, there are really red flags that we are raising higher, and that's one of the areas that we as an assembly are interested in, to see that we put in a cap to the amount of debt that we incur, because the burden is to the East Africans. But again, as I said, there is no single law that we are going to pass that is going to pass the test if the political elite and the interests of the different partner states is not there. So, the political economy of decision-making has got to be put into consideration. We need to put that into consideration. That's why we, as members of the Assembly, there is the limit to how much we can do, and there is also how much the partner states can do. I hope I'm not running out of time. Okay, so now there is a lot that we can talk about in this area. We are cognizant of the fact that we have different tax holidays in the different regions. So each partner state tries to give completely different tax incentives to investors. And that is not a good race to have, because it compromises on our capacity to compete fairly. Recently, we passed the East African Competition Authority Act, and as amended. And the whole idea behind it is to see that we create a common platform for all investors in the region, so that there is no unfair competition. The whole region is managed under a common tax regime, and there is somebody who monitors and supervises, and therefore can be able to raise. And we were there to empower that East African Competition Authority with the powers to make sure that all those that are interested in investing in the region, they must pass that test, and they must be seen to be playing with the same rules of engagement at all levels, because we have seen how they have run other businesses out of our partner states, because they manipulate the tax system, they manipulate the government systems, and come and impose themselves here and run our investors out of our local people, and even other investors out of business. So this is one of the areas that we are looking at. Of course, there is also the issue of corrupt tendencies. Some of these are a result of corruption. The application are a result of corruption. And as EAC, we have a protocol on good governance and anti-corruption. And quite recently, we were trying to generate a bill, an anti-corruption bill. It has been there for some time. The conversation has been quite difficult, because when you go to other partner states, they tell you that our existing legal regime is strong enough, and we do not require a regional law. Now, you see, in our legislative function, the first thing you do is you assess the existing legal regimes in the different partner states to assess whether it is necessary to come out with a regional law. So there are countries that hide behind that and tell you that we do not require a regional because the one that we have is good enough. Of course, they do that because perhaps this other one will come with much more stronger and much more harsher rules, and yet you have to manage the domestic politics as well. So this is where we are as an assembly. We juggle. We have to manage the politics around our regional integration. But the good news is there is progress. Not all is lost, Ajameni. You have seen how much progress we have made as a region ever since we got into, if you assess the progress that we have so far made in 20 years, it's tremendous. And I can tell you that nobody is going to stop regional integration. Nobody, not even a single partner state, is going to stop regional integration. The forces around it are so strong that you will have to integrate or perish. So all we need to do is, how do we position ourselves to make it work for us? That's the question that we must be asking. So sometimes I listen to people and say, why should we go into regional? There's no need and so on. Whether you want it or not, you will find yourself relating with one another in one way or the other. What we need is a rules-based system that allows everybody to play by the rules. And we as a country should also be able to say we need to negotiate our interests in the broader interest of regional integration. So this is where the conversation should be. So IALA is ready to have these conversations on different themes on a regular basis, and we are open to business. And I can assure you that as far as we are concerned, we are making strides. Now, let me just make one last comment. On the issue of borders, because it also has an impact on how do we generate domestic revenues. On the issue of borders, and particularly, let me touch the delicate issue of our border with the Rwanda. The matters under interrogation are not merely trade matters. They are much broader than just trade. And it is okay, and I want to repeat this, it is okay, as much as it may send a bad signal, but it is okay to seek the intervention of third parties when such a dispute arises in our different partner states. It is our considered opinion that anything that helps us to achieve harmony, good relations with our different partner states, we should explore it. And while we do that, we need to strengthen our own capacity as a region to be able to deal with it explicitly. What we are dealing with is both a political matter, and of course, it has an impact on our trade relations. So there has been the weaponization of trade. And once you see you have weaponization of trade, most often the ordinary people are the ones who suffer the consequences. And the conversation is always localized about loss of revenue here and there and so on. But in the broader context, there are some drivers that we may not be competent enough even to deal with them in our small spaces. Thank you so much.
I chose to give him more time because he has quite a bit of issues that we need to know. Number two, equity in time, because our colleague spent almost 30 minutes in the presentation, he spent 40 minutes. So I think I was a bit fair, right? And Mr. Dong, you present very interesting things, but I want us to, what I'm noticing is that it seems the way the East African community was formulated, good intentions with a lot of safeguards for the political interest. Good intentions with a lot of safeguards of the political interest of member states, whereby you are not allowing the East African institution to have a strong teeth to bite, because you have an East African court which is seemingly stronger than the EAC. And so, can we borrow ideas from how the EAC is functioning to strengthen our EAC? The East African Court, how it is functioning to strengthen the EAC. Now, I see Odom shaking his head as an impossibility. I have questions that will take us back. But these questions are related to what I've just been saying. What is the relevance, therefore, of the EAC? Having said what you have said, and considering that, of course, if a legislation is passed at the EAC level, it is superior and therefore needs to be domesticated at country level. Why is there seemingly protectionism of the sovereignty thing always seeming to come forward and overshadowing what the EAC would have achieved? And what does it mean to pass the political test? Honorable Don, what does it mean to pass the political test for anything to actually be taken seriously? You'll probably respond during plenary, but I would like to bring on board somebody from the ministry who is online. Gerard, is Gerard still there? Are you still there, Gerard? I would like you to talk to us about policy issues. And if you could do it just in 5 minutes, that would be very useful because we have run out of time. I know we started late, and I'm going to ask this August House to allow us some more time, maybe another 15 minutes, since we started about 30 minutes late. And then after that, I'll have somebody from Rwanda by the names of Cyrus Nkosi from the Governance for Africa, who will also be talking to us. So Gerard, if you're online, confirm to me that
Yes,
you're
I'm online.
Thank you very much.
I'm online. Thank you very much. Good
You are fine.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
SEATINI and the honorable members of parliament, all protocol observed. I would like to provide some information on a couple of issues which have come up in the presentations and the discussions. Number one is on the question of the domestic tax, the EAC domestic tax harmonization policy and the lack of guiding principles. I just wanted to inform the meeting that in 2019, the Council of Ministers passed a domestic tax harmonization policy, which we had been developing for the previous approximately 10 years. So I would encourage that colleagues, we get into this document, we look at those principles, and then progress the discussion to the level of what should Uganda's policy approach be to domesticating these principles. Because these are a broad range of principles covering income tax, VAT, and excise duty, and would require a detailed response. So that is where the discussion should be. The second point I wanted to mention is that on the issue of tax incentives, tax incentives, obviously a critical question within the discussion of domestic tax harmonization, very critical, because it protects, at least it protects us and each of our countries respectively from the race to the bottom, which has been identified as the main constraint to raising domestic revenues. Now, the main issue on the discussion of tax incentives, at least from the perspective of Uganda, is the context. And it's very important that the context is gotten right. As part of implementation of our domestic revenue mobilization strategy, we have started the journey of developing a tax expenditure governance framework. This year, for the first time, we published some information. If you go to the Ministry of Finance website, you'll find some information there, but it's very important to get the context right. What is being published there is tax expenditure. And there is a technical definition of tax expenditure. It doesn't mean that all instruments which lead to revenue foregoing are tax incentives and therefore tax expenditure. There are certain things which are part of a design of a tax system. Yeah, they lead to revenue foregone, but they are an inherent part of the design of a tax system. For instance, when you are going to compute income tax, you give a deduction. Some of the deductions may not actually be tax expenditure. But what would be of concern are those things over and above the normal. And we've tried to use a criteria there to determine what tax expenditure is. So when you're looking at that information, you have to keep that at the back of the mind. Otherwise, you might end up with a misinterpretation. Finally, the question of double taxation agreements. We are giving away rights and so on. Double taxation agreements have problems, but they also have opportunities within them. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years is basically to try and close the gaps. And we've made a lot of progress. We've recently concluded the renegotiation of the double taxation agreement with Mauritius. And we are going to start the final processes of ratification and bringing into effect the new agreement. And we've made a lot of progress, as you will see. Of course, you remember that the gaps which exist in some of our treaties are because of, the history. where we are coming from, the technical capacity then, and all kinds of other issues. We are in the final stages of renegotiating the Dutch tax treaty, and we are also making very good progress there. Those two are the most problematic ones from our perspective in terms of eroding our tax base. Then once we finish that, we'll then go into the others, which also pose a risk. Now, somebody mentioned the EAC DTAs and DTA, and the fact that somebody has not ratified. Maybe the discussion should be that, okay, somebody hasn't ratified, and that's a problem. But when you dig into the devil of the detail, you're going to find that this treaty was negotiated in the 2000s, and since then, the international tax policy landscape has evolved so much that perhaps before that, those other people signed the treaty, we need to go it on the table quickly, and we try and fine tune it in light of the evolution of international tax policy over the last couple of years. And that's, for me, very critical. Because once you sign, then again, to get that country or those countries which have taken long back on the table to close the gaps might take us another 5-10 years, which again exposes us to risk. Those are the quick points I wanted to mention to the meeting. I thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. Somebody also asked, what is that the tax utility has to resolve? No, those are preambles to the plenary. I would like to have Kusi online. Are you Kusi there, please? Confirm that you're
yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you. My name is Cyrus Kusi from Rwanda, working with Governance for Africa. I want to thank SEATINI Uganda, who is also our partner on this agenda, for organizing this important meeting. With all the protocols observed, greetings from the land of 1,000 hills. Well, there's a lot maybe to talk about. Regina talked about, hello, can you hear me?
18.5 inside.
Yes, Regina talked briefly about the tax incentives. Maybe we'll have another time and share Rwanda's perspectives, but mine is to come back on the objective of this meeting that also allowed us to attend. First, do we believe in integration? Second, do we have strong institutions? We are talking about harmonization of tax laws. We cannot have harmonized tax laws when our member states are still negotiating and implementing individually. There is a lot of violation of the EAC treaty. We are not talking about that. How are we going to harmonize when even the founding countries of the EAC integration, you are not even allowed to go there or to travel there with your national ID? Do we believe in integration we are talking about, or just representatives and believe in these borders which were imposed on us? Of recent, I think you're all aware, leave alone the border closure issues between Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. There's even killings of truck drivers on the borders of South Sudan. To an extent, we are killing people who are bringing goods to us or food to us. And the Honorable who was talking, he even said, this is beyond us. Now, this is a very big question to me. if EALA maybe is not independent even to question member states about the issues that we are facing. There are a lot of agreements provided by the EAC treaty which are not implemented. Some resolutions are made, some countries are quick to implement, others. So what happens to those ones? Who questions them? I know EALA, they do a lot of work. During my youth movements, I remember, I think I had Honorable Nakauchi there. She even really helped us much when we are designing and forming the EAC youth policy. But it's like the EALA representatives, these are not people representatives or regional representatives, they are state representatives. That's when you see, even they decide, okay, this representative is not defending maybe all our country, let us vote him or her out and go back. So I think we need first to believe in the integration we are talking about, because what we are talking, even the laws and the rules we are putting in place, are they going to be implemented? So designing, ratifying all these charters and protocols is one thing, but implementation is very important. But implementation goes with belief as one people, one community. Then strong institutions, I don't, and how is EALA, this is a question, how are you doing your consultations? Because maybe having a session in Rwanda or Burundi or in Uganda, and the president comes to open your session, of course he will be a host. You'll be dancing to the tune of a host. But how do you call a minister of the East African community of Rwanda or Burundi or Tanzania, maybe to ask them, to question them about ABCD for explanations? Do you have those powers? But we always even see groupings in the EALA members representing, like trying to defend their countries or member states, but we don't see that much unison as a regional bloc or a regional legislative assembly. Thank you so much. I once again thank SEATINI, and we wish very soon we'll be meeting physically when the power of people say, let us open borders and join physically. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Silas. And I would like to add another question to what you have been talking about. Are we committed to integration? Or are we just window dressing or playing to the gallery? Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very good time for us to have a discussion. I know we're past lunchtime, but this is primarily for Q&A. My friend who had, you can now loosen your horses and let them go.
Thank you very much. Mine was, I had two issues. They might have already been resolved, but just to emphasize, the issue of consensus in the EAC is an issue which has gone up to the summit level. Because when you go for these meetings, they have what they say, we are still consulting. And that's the 10 years that we have been talking about.
Still consulting.
Still consulting, and you stay for 10 years and you're still consulting. So we need to see how we can find a way of allowing partner states to proceed at a certain point. And we have received some guidance that in the event that the treaty is reviewed, we shall, what we want to see is that at least 4 partner states, at least if 4 partner states agree, then we should be able to proceed. Secondly, is about protocols and bills. We do have a comprehensive list and a dashboard of all protocols and bills of the EAC. And if this is not available, then the Ministry of EAC Affairs is happy to share this with the MPs, such that they are able to track and see exactly where we have some red lights, where we have yellow lights, and where we have green lights, such that
they are able to follow up very quickly. About the issue of double taxation that has already been talked about, I beg to submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable, we don't have to use this microphone for avoidance of COVID. If you want, you can come in. It's okay. 3 minutes only. Politicians talk too much.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Also, I want first of all to add my voice to the team organizing such an engagement. This has been quite important, and we need to ask more engagements. So it gives us a conversation where we want to go. Two, also the presenters have discussed some pertinent issues. But of course, I want to start with the Nalunga. I think what is important with continental trading area, you said we have to move together. It's true. But then in our discussions, you have to be candid if you want to move together. You cannot say, I want to trade with you. After discussing on the table, you go around and do a different thing. It becomes very difficult, even if you want to move together, you don't tell me the truth, that this is acceptable or not. This is what is happening in the integration. I happen to be a member of the International Trade Council in WTO. Then once the European Union said, you have to come to our market. That's all the European countries, they agree to that. You who is coming in America to come into that market, they speak the same language. You can imagine we've agreed to trade with each other, but you are putting a non-tariff barriers in your own country. How it works safe. And trading means movement of people, interaction, movement of goods. But you are still, if I export to you, you say no, I don't. So I think that's quite the bottom line. That principally, if we discuss and agree, and we pass laws that help the country, the partner states, we should do it. Look at I can give an example. Why have we succeeded in single customs territory? All of them agree that the tariff barriers we have in East African partner states, is the hassle of importing goods. You take 5 days, 7 days. Once all the East African Customs Union agreed and said, from Mombasa to Kampala, we need to make 3 days. They put a structure, and that's it. And the advantages are just quite many. So this is the way to go. But otherwise, if we don't have that candid fairness to integrate to each other and speak the truth, we are not going anywhere. Second one, there is somebody who talked about the private sector-led growth and public-private partnership. We should learn from other countries. In 1993, when the New World Order of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, it was a strategy that you don't come out to develop. So if you are coming as East African community, learn those strategies that prevent you to grow. Because as me, as an accountant, you cannot tell me sell your property and I remain with nothing. And you say that's a liberalization of trade. What has happened to other countries, Asian tigers? When they brought that policy, they said, no, we can go public-private partnership, but I remain with my assets. Look at Malaysia, look at Singapore. They put a model of a hybrid public-private partnership, where government provided a service, then they said we can share. And the infrastructure development is so huge. These are people technically, we have to benchmark and learn from them if we want to integrate, because these models are working out properly. Because you cannot be poor and say you will be on your own. Somebody who is going to raid your money, you have strings attached on you. So we need to strategically plan as within the integration. I'll talk about non-tariff barriers. I think this is where we need to agree with countries which are already privileged. This is equity, this is inclusiveness. You cannot have a port. Tanzania has a port, Kenya has a port, and then you create another inland within the same country. Look at getting goods from Mombasa, you drop them to Nairobi. Then from Nairobi to Naivasha. Suppose I create an inland port within Maraba. I'm reducing the cost of trading. Those ones coming from South Sudan, Kasindi, Goma, they will be trading near here in Maraba. And what does that mean? It has an economic multiplier effect with Ugandans because they want to share also, being interlinked because we are not advantaged. But you who is negotiating, you must be shrewd and say, well, what do you want to achieve? We want to remove non-tariff barriers, don't create them in your own country. I think we have to be open and be shrewd what to negotiate on the table and what we want to put across. I think another one, last one, yes. I won't take a lot of time, is taxation. The formulation policy of taxation. We have to learn these countries which have succeeded. I've been in China. They are looking at a taxation formulation policy of 800 million people. In East African community, we are about 300. How do we fail to have statistics, data, the people we are targeting to tax, and we put a very good policy that can help facilitate the environment of trading within the region. With those few remarks, I rest my case.
Thank you, Honorable. And colleagues online, I open up the floor for you. Please join us in this plenary interactively. Any other observations? And honorable members, we are civil society organizations. We tend to make too much noise, but this noise is useful noise. And I can assure you that we are on record as SEATINI Tax Justice Alliance and in the respective individual organizations to supporting policy formulation work in this government and in the region. So trust us, we are your partners, use us, you are going to benefit from us. That's the commitment we can make to you. Now the question is, how can we benefit EALA? How can we be useful to the EAC process? Because surely we have resources and we are able to use them to correct information. We are talking about the issue of evidence to inform policy. So how can we contribute to that process? Any other concerns? I will take you, yourself, the lady. I want to make sure this is gender inclusive. 4 men to 1 woman is dangerous. Yes. As the lady, 2 ladies, thanks. I will start with the ladies. Please go. Otherwise, I'll be accused for being gender insensitive or gender blind.
I want to thank SEATINI first and foremost for this opportunity to have this conversation about the East African community and the challenges. I also want to thank SEATINI. When I was a member of parliament, in our member state parliament, they used to give us a lot of insights on the issue of EPAs, and that was to do with the ACP-EU partnership. I was one of those members who was part of the delegation to that assembly, and we benefited a lot. And you gave us a lot of insights, and it's what made us overcome some of the challenges we were getting when we were interacting with the EU member states. Now, I want to just give general comments. One, I want us to know that the East African community as a REC is doing so well as a regional economic bloc. It is one of those blocks that other blocks are trying to come and benchmark. I was happy to note when one of the facilitators here said that even the EU members came one time and were wondering how we're succeeding with certain matters. that they, as the EU, to date, seem not to be able to catch up with. So EAC is one of those regs that is actually performing well. And the key issue here is EAC is integrating markets. I think that's the reason why even going into Congo, despite the challenges it has. That's the reason we went into integration with the RSS, despite the security and all other challenges that some of these member states have. We are integrating markets. When you look at the statistics that were shown on the screen there on trade, Uganda has made strides with these neighbors. Where we are, where we were, and where we are now, despite COVID, despite all these challenges we are talking about, traders and goods from Uganda are moving outside this country, and we are able to make strides in that area. So that is very good. It's the reason even this country, our parliament and our some members of parliament of this country, for having passed a law to make roads in the DRC. It is about markets, it's about trade, and also the one-stop border points that are being created all over, Goli and other border posts. It's about trade, to facilitate trade. So the key issues, like one of them, it was mentioned that now we are having challenges. Kenya is not taking some of our goods. Yes, we used to be a net importer from Kenya, but now we are a net exporter. And they are not sleeping. They are wondering, what is it? So they are trying to stop some of this, despite all these protocols that we have, despite the treaty that is supposed to be our guiding document in this trade. So it's about markets. We also want to protect their market, despite, this is being a common market, but that protectionism, because they are losing out. So when we open into the DRC, when we open into the RSS, we are looking for markets. So soon, the issue to do with the market of milk, eggs, and all that will not be something to be talked about like we are discussing it today. When the DRC opens, they will consume more than maybe even can produce. So let's look at the bigger picture. These are the side shows that we're experiencing right now will soon be over. And when we are at the EAC legislating, sometimes that is the picture we try to look at, the bigger picture. We try to avoid the small conflicts that try to hamper even our discussions in order to achieve the key objective. So that is the key guiding principle that we, as members of IALA, try to look at. There are quite a number of issues to be said, but let me just stop there because I think
Thank you so much. Please go ahead. Next lady, use the mic that is on your desk. If there's none, if you want, you can. This one seems right.
Thank you very much, the moderator. Protocol observed. I want to thank SEATINI for giving us this opportunity to engage, to share, to interact on matters pertaining to our community, the East African community. Once again, I'm Noel Kisembo, Member of Parliament representing the people of Kivale and Chairperson EAC Affairs Committee. I want to pick from my colleague, one of the members who submitted from Rwanda, and he made a phrase of one people, one community. Indeed, the East African community is something that we are proud of, and I can say in the 20 years of its existence has made a great contribution, especially on the market integration among the partner states, which we appreciate. I think going forward, we need to have the tendency of regional first and the national secondary. And that would help us avoid the nationalistic tendencies. Recently, I was even questioning one of the notions here in Uganda, the Bubu, buy Uganda, build Uganda. And I was saying it should be buy East Africa, build East Africa, if we have to go to the regional level. And it's important. I see the issue of consensus being paramount, and we need to look at possibilities of quickening consensus, because from the submission of my colleague Honorable Odong, it looks like many of the policies and laws that are passed at regional level can only take effect if there is consensus among the partner states. So we need to quicken that. And I was thinking, like my colleague said, going forward, when we review the treaty, there should be a possibility that we put a percentage consensus for a law or a policy to take effect. We may not say a certain number of states because they will keep increasing, but if we put a percentage, partner states, once there is consensus at that level, then implementation can start, and the others can join as and when they get ready. That's what I think. And lastly, I want to say we need to have in place a compliance redress mechanism, so that when partner states in one way or another are not compliant to the agreed position, to the agreed policy of the community, then there are clear steps that have to be taken against such partner states without any problem. And maybe lastly, on the conflict settlement, really this also is an issue we need to, that needs to be addressed in the treaty very clearly, so that when we have these small conflicts issues arising among the partner states, then the method of resolving them is very clear, and probably from within, so that we don't take too long to achieve what we would have achieved as a community. Otherwise, once again, thank you, SEATINI, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And the issue of compliance actually also calls for accountability. And it seems very well that in the framing of the EAC, accountability was avoided, because it has the tendency of asking the heads of state to be accountable. So we think we need to look into that. Now, the first gentleman here.
Asante ndugu zangu.
Asante sana.
Nataka niseme tena, ninashukuru kabisa kupatiwa hii fursa tuongee pamoja, na mkinijua vizuri, mimi ni mbunge wa Uganda, sio Kenya, sio Tanzania ama nchi nyingine. Sisi tukiwa Waganda, mtu akiongea Kiswahili wengine wanadhani pengine wanatoka Tanzania ama Kenya. Sio hivyo. Mimi ni wa hapa. Nashukuru kabisa watu wangu wa SEATINI. I want to thank you. Just for a reminder, I'm Musila John, representing Mugulo East in the Misindo district, and my constituency borders with 2 other constituencies in Kenya, led by Major Waluke, retired of Sirisia, and then Mr. Kapondi of Elgon. Ndio naona ni anaongea Kiswahili. Kile sio sabifu kabisa, lakini ile yenye naweza kanipatia kwa. Na yangu hapa Uganda ni kusambaza Kiswahili. Waganda wote waongee Kiswahili. Ulisema hapa uanze na wabunge Nani wabunge gani? Anza na mimi kwanza, na mimi ndio takuwa mbele yao kuwafundisha. Mama mwenyekiti wangu, Mama Noli nikisema, nimeanza kumfundisha pamoja na ndugu Chemaswe. Tunamfundisha kidogo kidogo, but that is not the point. Let me just go straight to what my colleagues, Iyala, ndugu Odongo, thank you. The presentation was marvelous. But before the East African countries became countries, around 1894 in their formulation, the East Africans were there. I and Honorable Musamali come from a community of Masaba. 70% of our people are in Kenya. We do the same cultural issues. Sakamuzais do what? If you go to Kenya, you get Musamali. I am Musila, you get so many Musilas. Actually, my clan is almost 80% in Kenya, in a place called Kimilili. Just like that of Honorable Musamali. Now, what do I mean? Can the Iyala Parliament, can our parliaments fast track the cultural integration of East Africa? The India Masaba, the cultural institution of the Masaba, in Uganda called Bagiso and in Kenya called Bukusu. Can we begin with that as East Africans? The moment facilitator, you don't have the moral obligation and the cultural connotation and the undertones of that, then we miss the point.
The foreign borders will continue to exist.
Yes, the foreign borders will continue. But when the Bamas are circumcising from Kenya and Uganda, they don't care about those borders, those physical borders. So I want us that we do that. And take it seriously, Nduguodong and Honorable Musamali, they do it. In Uganda, I sit on the committee of Madam Nolin, and we are here, and I applied to be there for a purpose, because I know Naweza 20 million. The second issue, which may touch you heavily, small countries have brought wars in this one, if you don't know. Very small countries. Interrogate your history of 1914, the First World War, and many other world wars. They are triggered usually by very small, tiny countries. I did not have a platform to speak this, but at least I've spoken to Honorable Musamali at one time. Why did you hurry to admit fully as members other countries, let alone the core 3 East African states, which are not even coalesced in the principles, yani sera zile za ujamaa wetu. Umeshaenda Kenya ndugu yangu? Umeshaenda Kenya? Nyinyi mnakaa Kenya, pengine mnapitia Kenya kuenda Tanzania. Alafu ongea, ambia wa Kenya kama sisi wabunge, Mungu, hawajui kuimba hata. They don't know the East African anthem. Not even in schools, but in Uganda, any child, like you quoted, any child deep down there, they can do that. And the very last thing, certainly, we must not discourage the strides we have taken. We encourage them. I and Madam Nolin, my brother Chemaswet, tuko hapa kujenga mataifa zetu East Africa. Asante kabisa.
Asante sana.
And I'm a Rastaman, by the way, and I wanted to say that I'm a Rastaman. Asante kabisa.
Tunashukuru sana. I would like to read some comments online, and one came from Emmanuel Keith. He also repeats exactly most of the things that you have said. One says that emphasis ought to be placed on diversifying our exports. The similarities between the revealed comparative advantages of the EAC member states implies that we are producing the same things and hoping to trade with each other in the same products. If we are producing what I think our neighbors are producing or need, the trade will transcend the geopolitics. that we're talking about. And the second one is a review of the EAC treaty should go alongside review of progress of integration. Should we be letting in more members while the existing ones seem to have a waning spirit of the community, with abrupt trade bans on goods, extended border closures, killing traders and drivers along trade routes that do not seem to be addressed? On variable geometry, should we have a time limit to certain aspects, such as on movement of persons, e.g. Uganda and Kenya and Rwanda, allowing national ID as a movement document, while Tanzania is still insistent on passports? Passports processing and costs are expensive for small traders and citizens. The other day in news, we heard that one of the traders who crossed from Gatuna to Rwanda was shot dead trying to take charcoal to Rwanda. That shouldn't be happening in an integrated society. Feel free, if you want to go to the podium or to speak from the mic.
Thank you. I'm privileged that I have a mic next to me, so let me use this one. Thank you, moderator. Once again, the name is Paul Saman, one of Uganda's representatives in the East African Legislative Assembly. And I want also to thank SEATINI for organizing this dialogue, because we have learned a lot of things, and I'm sure we are also going to benefit out of this dialogue. I noted so many things, but because of time, I think I'll not probably comment to all of them, but a few of them. When our colleague, Honorable Dongo, concluded his presentation, Henry here asked him several questions, about 5 questions. They were all very serious questions. In fact, one of them can discourage you, including this meeting. The question was, what is the relevance of East Africa then? When you look at the East African community, when you look at these challenges we are going through, they are blocking goods from going from one partner state to another. Instead of partner states exporting goods to another country, they are exporting coffins. If you have seen them, instead one country is receiving coffin from another partner state. So now he's asking, what is the relevance of East African community there? But let me try to answer. It is a very difficult question, but I liked it. And I think even the whole of the participants should take interest in it. My view is that it is true there are challenges in East Africa and with our integration process. But we should not lose hope because of the challenges that we are going through. I'll give you an example. Some of the achievements you have already alluded to them. For example, the smooth flow of trade so far, with the few facilities that have been put in place, like the East African Customs Management Act, it has facilitated trade. You look at the single customs territory we have just talked about. You look at the common external tariff. These are all laws that came as a result of East Africa, and therefore even enactments by Yara. So when you look at some of those small achievements, we cannot just, and you can't even just say that they are small. They are. When you get to the traders, they will tell you that please just do more. But so far, we are happy with some of these interventions. The other one I want to just bring to the attention of the participants here is that, as my colleague said, Honorable Dongo, that the case of Uganda and Rwanda, it is beyond the trade. It is beyond trade, it is the other factors in politics and many. I want to tell the participants here, and it's good that there's someone who is participating from Rwanda,
I don't know whether there's also participants from Nairobi, I mean from Kenya, from Tanzania, whatever. If they are there, that's very good, such that everybody is on form. I want to tell this house that if it was not because of our Rwanda and the South Sudan, I mean, let me use Rwanda itself. If it was not because of our Rwanda and Uganda being part of East African community, one of these countries will have walked to the capital of the other. And you know what would have been the case? If Rwanda and Uganda walked to not for tourism, they would have walked to Kigali for war. Or Kigali would have walked to where? To Kampala for war. But because of being part of the East African community, this thing has been averted. And therefore, we must celebrate that for being part of East Africa, we have averted war. The same to South Sudan, the Republic of South Sudan. As you may be aware, I think, I don't know whether it was Kiza was presenting, and even Misira has just alluded to say, why did we have to admit some of these countries? Yes, even in the fastest run, Usain Bolt also started with one step. Now, if we were to wait for these countries to achieve minimum levels, we will not regret. We will not be together. But by virtue of having allowed them to come, even when they are limping, like the case of the Republic of South Sudan, at the beginning, you know, the Ugandan currency, you remember how the value appreciated because of the trade which was coming from South Sudan. And but the most important is that the people of South Sudan, probably they would have been disaster if it's not because of being part of South Africa. The war has been minimized. Somehow, all these addresses you are aware, their intervention by East Africa to ensure that they bring about peace. And they are going there because of East Africa. You remember when we went there in 2013, before they joined East Africa. And then they said, we even started having problems with the individuals, our Ugandans who were there. They said, you are the people who are causing problems here because our army was in South Sudan on bilateral terms. But now when we go there as in East Africa, then there is mutual respect and so on and so forth. That's what I think, that much as we could be limping as a community, but we cannot underestimate those benefits. And then of course, about Yara, we have been, there are a number of laws that have been passed. I'll just give you an example, and they have enabled the community to move, like in the customs protocol, we have made laws to facilitate the operationalization of the customs union, yes, customs union protocol, as well as the common market protocol. Even recently, we made the one of monetary union, passed the law on monetary institute to lay foundation for the establishment of the Central Bank of East Africa. So there are processes going on. However, what we need to also put in place, and you people who are in the civil society, we need you to help us to now advocate for amendment of the treaty to provide for exclusive legislation by IARA. Because this matter which Godom talked about the shared responsibility of legislation, IARA as well as the other organs, the executive. The executive has usurped some of our powers. Yes, executive, through the Council of Ministers, through the summits, they have usurped the powers of IARA by coming up with protocols. And we are even on Hansard, on Hansard, putting council attention that they should stop, now that there is IARA, which is supposed to be a legislative body, they should stop coming up with the laws through protocols, through security declarations, through name them. They should stop, and the role of IARA should be to pass laws, and then the executive will assent to them. In fact, someone from those who are attending from the tax body, you are aware that as per now, what was going to be the strike by traders, It was, the other day there was a screaming headline. EAC law to cause the, I think, havoc in the, yes, if you read it, yes. EAC law, and here you ask myself, which law did we pass here which is causing problems? Only to realize it was a legal notice which was passed by what? By the Summit Rule Council. Yes, that the one of the 35% and this 3.5%. Yes, that one taxing garments using what? Kilograms weight instead of the value. And it was not our law. It is a law which was brought by the executive. And this is the problem. So we want you to assist us. Now that you have organized this meeting to share these ideas, civil society organize us and advocate such that now we amend the treaty. If it is amending the treaty in favor of the executive, they can do it even a single day. But if it is in favor of even the people's needs, they will not do it. So you come and you start and then we shall follow you. I'll be part of those who either demonstrators or whatever. Now, there is this other question again. I'm on your question. You say, why is there seemingly protectionism? When we have come together, I was thinking it was in one of the debates. I said, you see the problem of this integration. It is like marriage. When you marry, I think the intention, even when you're in church, the priest will ask you, are you ready to take care of this wife or this husband and even to produce children and protect her and protect the children? Now, when you come to integration, I have equated this integration to like marriage. When we marry, we have agreed to come together and even produce what? Children. Now, when you produce children, can you produce children while you are putting on suits? Yes, because when it comes to producing children, is that now, when the time comes that we are now going to bed, we are going to produce children. We must keep ourselves naked. But now for you, time has come for producing children. Now you are putting on a suit and now you are putting on the problem. You get it? So our view is that countries, since they committed themselves, to integrate, I hope it's not for ill intentions. If it's not for ill intentions by heads of state, if it is for the intentions of East Africa, let them speak to themselves honestly and say now it is time for us to trade. These unnecessary barriers, they should be eliminated. We have even a law on elimination of barriers. But as we talk, someone will come and tell you, that so far we have about out of 114 barriers, we have now so far rectified or normalized about 4 or 5. Now they are counting barriers more. You know what I'm saying? Now this is what we have achieved, this is what we have done. So, but my view is from this question you put across, why is there seemingly protection? Somebody who was I think someone who online almost agreed with it. Say now the problem is that we are producing the same one products. So now Kenya is producing milk, Uganda is producing milk. But now the advantage is that Uganda was producing milk at a cheaper cost. So when it goes to Kenya, it is cheaper than the milk in Kenya. It causes what? Problems. My view is that the other recently they passed the East African Community Competition Act. This is for purpose of allowing for mergers of different farms in the community to avoid unnecessary competition. So my view is that traders, manufacturers in East Africa should take advantage of this law, such that now, since we all produce the same product, what I want to do, my view is that the producers in Kenya of the same products, in Kenya, Uganda, let them come together, work together, merge, and then trade, because you like it or not.
Honorable Musamali, just a question as the moderator is the other side. You have 1 or 2 questions. Number 1, I have not read the protocols and the laws, the treaty properly, internalize them. Do we have mechanisms of discipline and the punishment of the members, errant members? And that's number one. The last question to you, you made the analogy of family marriage and whatever. So within the East African community, which country is the husband, which are the wives, and which are the children?
Well, I hope I don't again become a presenter, but because it's given me very little time. The first question I will come with, the next, by the way, the one of husband and wife. This one, in case if I answer there is a husband and wife, it will cause a serious problem. But I just wanted to tell you that our coming together is like a marriage. And the marriage is that we have allowed, we have agreed to give birth to children, and there are certain things we are supposed to do to give birth to what? Children. So for this matter, there must be there's give and take. Yes. In the community. So there are those we should do, the country should allow, government should allow that for us to achieve integration, there are certain things they should leave for purpose of they seed them to the what? For the bigger good. Then the question you are talking about the dispute mechanism or to enforce compliance. I think because of the consensus issue is a very big problem. Because the decision making in East Africa is that all must be through what? Consensus. There is a mechanism provided for. However, it's a problem one because it says even when to punish a country which is involved in the violation of the treaty, that country is also going to be part of the meeting. And they must agree on what? Is that colleagues? They must agree on the punishment, and this is what we needed to do. Yes, they must amend the what? The treaties on the issue of what? Consensus. I think you take this seriously as a technical people. Because now, even now, like this one which are not paying you their contribution. Even when it comes to sit down and come up with sanctions for not paying, they are also supposed to take the what? Be part of the meeting. And also, this is now the issue of a case of monkeys and forests. So there is something was raised by Kiza on dispute mechanism. There is a protocol, I think, on security and defense. That protocol provides that there will be a council, a panel of elders who will be there to mediate in the case there are disputes or there are problems between the partner states. It is provided in the protocol. It's not through our legislation. However, the very members of SADC resolved and said that we don't need this panel permanently. It should be established as and when there are what? Problems. I think my view is that that panel should be established and permanent, such that way, because conflicts don't wait for a particular time or make appointments. So there will always be conflicts, but you need now that panel. My view is that that panel should be established permanently, such that they are able to detect and prevent conflict. Because conflict, you like it or not, it's a natural phenomenon. Lastly, this was from the Madame Jenny Nagunga. She also asked a very serious question. She said, I think there were not questions, but she was talking about we need to move as a region. We need to work to get out of this debt trap. We need to find a way of stimulating our economies. But then she also said, so that means she was saying we need to work as a bloc. Now, she asked the questions. I mean, she said that if you can't swim in a pond, how do you expect to swim in an ocean? You get it? That is true. If we can't trade among ourselves, it's a trade in East Africa. Now, why are we going? By the way, this one is personal. Why are we going to Africa continent? Yes. Now, to me, this is personal. And I hope I also mobilize enough efforts from among you to support me. Me, I don't support this issue of going continent. Let us first do here. If we do now, the rest people now, SADC also does the same, ECOWAS does the same. Now, when these regs have really integrated well, then now we can Africa can come together. These are the very same thing. You have failed to solve the problem between you and your wife. And then you say, oh, now you go there and you are going to share this between the neighbors. How are you going to manage? I think that is not possible. So my view is that let us concentrate on East Africa. Let us make those small achievements. And we don't need to look for many big things. Just say, oh, just do many small things correctly. If we are to trade, people who give the money, because now even marriage, you are aware that if a Kenyan is married to a Uganda, they are here, the Kenyan lives here as a foreigner. Yes. They live as foreigners, then they cannot get jobs, for example. Now they're taking people there, and they have quarreled with people in migration. Say, why? What's the problem? These things are beyond us. So if we can...
I'm sorry, but I'm grabbing the mic from the moderator because I'm your chair. There are honorable members of parliament who are supposed to attend an afternoon plenary. So if you can just wrap it up quickly.
That was the last statement I was making. Thank you.
No, actually, I'm really terribly sorry that you stressed it, but you know yourselves. You really talk and talk and talk. And when you talk, we can't stop you. But there's one person whom I will just give maybe 2 minutes online. We are doing badly on time. But because this is our first time, and let me just inform that this is the beginning of our dialogues. So we are going to have additional dialogue. Don't consider this as the one and only. No, we're going to have more dialogue. So, but let me have Mary online, and then I can come back here. Please do it in 2 minutes only. We are doing terribly badly. Mary, are you there? Confirm that you are there. Are you there, Mary? Can you please unmute your mic? She couldn't unmute. Can you help us unmute her? We failed. So can we let it pass? She was following the discussion. So the two last ones, I selected you, my friend, but you have put your hand up. Oh, it's going to, yeah. Please do it within the closing, right? So please, 2 minutes each.
Ningependa kushukuru mwenyekiti ya kamati ya bunge na manaibu wao na wajumbe kutoka Afrika Mashariki.
Does anyone need a translation? Proceed.
Kuna maneno chache ambayo inachangia utofautiano katika Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki. Na mojawapo ni mawasiliano. Mawasiliano katika mitandao ya mawasiliano. Nikisema mawasiliano ni maneno ya simu. MTN inafanya kazi na Tigo ama Vodacom Tanzania ama hapana. So hiyo ni shida ya mawasiliano. Kwa sababu hatujakubali kufanya kazi kimitandao. Ya pili ni lugha vile vile. Kwa sababu mwenyekiti pale alisema kuna mtu anahitaji kutafsiriwa lugha ya Kiswahili ili aelewe. Tayari tuna utofautiano katika mkutano huu. Kwa sababu hatuelewani kimawasiliano ya lugha. Ndio maana tukiwa na Watanzania watatuogopa kwa sababu tunaongea lugha ya Kiingereza. Nao watataka wabaki kivyao kwa sababu ni wasomi katika lugha ya Kiswahili. Ya pili ni kuwepo na maneno ya siasa na ukabila.
siasa na ukabila katika mataifa zetu, ya kwamba sisi Uganda tuna ukabila wakati tunapiga kura. Sitahitaji kupigia kabila ingine kwa sababu mimi ni Muganda ama mimi ni Mnyankole. Na iwapo huko Tanzania, Watanzania watapiga kura kwa sababu ya sera ya chama. Chama inatuelekeza wapi, na hivyo watapiga lugha, na chenye inawasaidia ni mawasiliano katika lugha ya Kiswahili. Tuna shida katika Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, walinda usalama kwenye mipaka, walinda usalama kwenye mipaka. Ukifika Malaba, ukifika Busia, kuna walinda usalama wanataka kujihusisha kwa maneno ya usanyaji ya ushuru, na vile vile wanataka kula rushwa ili upite kwenda katika eneo ya nchi nyingine. Nimetoka kule jana Nairobi, na shida ni nyingi kukanda ya Kenya, si Uganda, kwa sababu walinda usalama kule Kenya watahitaji kitu kidogo kukuandikia cheti ya kwamba gari yako ipite nje ya Kenya. So tunatofautiana. Jambo jingine la umuhimu na la mwisho, wabunge wa Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, wakubwa wao ni kina nani? Wakubwa wao ni wapiga kura ya bunge za kimataifa, kwa sababu tukipiga kura kwa wabunge wa Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, sisi ndio wakubwa wao. Lakini mara ngapi wanatuletea vyombo ambazo wamepitisha katika bunge ya Afrika Mashariki, hawatuletei, hawaleti. So hatufahamu ni nini inaendelea katika bunge la Afrika Mashariki. Na vile vile wabunge wa Afrika Mashariki wana wadhamini wao, na wadhamini wao ni serikali zao. So hawezi kukashifu mipangilio za wadhamini wao au serikali zao. So wana watu wawili, mpiga kura ni mbunge ya Uganda na wadhamini ni serikali. So wacha nimalizie hivi. Utofauti mwingine inatuletea shida katika Afrika Mashariki ni sisi kuwa kwenye matofali tofauti ya kibiashara. Tuseme SADC, nchi nyingine iko SADC, nchi nyingine iko COMESA, nchi nyingine OIC na zingine mingi. So wakati tuna mpangilio ya Afrika Mashariki, tunavutwa na mpangilio zingine za matofali zingine. Asante. Huyu ni Jemaswe Abdifadhil Kisos, mbunge wa Soi constituency kwenye wilaya ya Kweni, na mimi ni naibu mwenyekiti ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki. Asante.
Asante sana, tunashukuru. Shukrani. Okay, the next one.
Thank you very much. Allow me to first of all thank SEATINI for giving us the opportunity to engage on these critical matters that affect our sub-region. To remind those that were not here in the beginning, I'm Dr. Emily Kugonza, Member of Parliament for Buyanja East County in Kivale District, but also the Deputy Chairperson of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee of the Parliament of Uganda, and also Board Chairperson Emeritus, Uganda Investment Authority. I'm here actually, I think it was the first person that was Jane, when she was giving introductory remarks, when she talked about the issue of domestic direct investment. And if we are to secure the sovereignty of this country, I think we really need to look at this. Today, we might be talking so much about trade facilitation, which is very critical, especially when we are speaking as a region. But everything does not begin with trade and end with trade. We must, as a country, prioritize domestic direct investment. We must do all what it takes and look at those challenges our domestic investors have been encountering, and more especially the issue of financing. Our country has made a lot of strides in terms of improving the livelihoods of the Ugandans in connectivity across the board, and this has not come as just by as a chance. It has been planned for, and more especially in terms of resources our government has been committing. And that's why, for example, you can talk about infrastructure. You move from the north to the south, from Tamaka Road, east to west, and all this has helped to facilitate trade. We have increased the electricity coverage and in terms of generation and also connectivity. But now, for example, what are those critical challenges the domestic investors are finding? Therefore, find trade more attractive, and more especially now that these kind of barriers, non-tariff barriers have been removed, and they continue to engage in that, but they fail to get into the area where it all begins. We must produce goods that are wanted across the board, produce goods of quality, and here we need to have cheaper capital for our people. And I would want to encourage, more especially when it comes to the flow of parliament, my colleagues, members of parliament, we really need to support government to commit more money that will go directly to the domestic investors, such that we can be able to compete with people that are able to access cheap capital. This is coming in Israel, of course. People will talk about, yes, we can't pride ourselves in the, yes, we've increased the foreign direct investments. But these are people, they are not philanthropists. They are people coming to make money and take it out. This money is not meant to develop us. They are looking for opportunities and gaps, and here, which is many of them that you have really pointed out, and racing to the bottom that we can actually attract as many as we can. But this is to some extent disadvantaging our own, because we are in the same market. And I think these are some of the issues, and I would want to see SEATINI, much as you are so much on the aspect of trade facilitation, we look at what is it that we need to do. And personally, I have identified the issue of the mindset. Our people want to trade, they don't want to invest. When you talk about all this, they want to get quick money. Of course, with investment, it will take a bit of time, but once it is done very well, we'll actually be able to secure the independence and the sovereignty of our country, even when we continue to engage with the others. And just lastly, my colleague and friend, Honorable Samali, mentioned something about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that to some extent is opposed to it. I think we actually need even the entire Africa, we need the entire global market, but what is most important, how prepared are we to be able to face whoever we want to trade? We cannot actually deal with ourselves. Even the East African market itself is so small. We need a bigger market, because every other day we are talking about growth, we are talking about expansion, the population is increasing and all. We need to be looking at where do we have the comparative advantage? And even though we don't have it, we need to grow it. For example, more especially in this era of innovation and technology and all that, and say that we actually outsmart those people that we are engaging with, and that is what will give us leverage, and we'll be able to move forward as a country. I beg to submit.
Thank you very much. And without making too many comments, I would like to take this opportunity to invite the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee to give us closing remarks, and I'm hoping that he'll also make his remarks within that closing remark.
Thank you very much, the moderator, the honorable members of the East African Legislative Assembly, my colleagues, the honorable members of the Parliament of Uganda, all of you members of the civil society gathered here today, and all the technocrats, and all of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to say that I'm greatly humbled to have been invited to make these closing remarks. So thank you very much, organizers, for the confidence you've vested in me to make these few remarks, and I will try to be as brief as possible because time is not our best ally. But let me also begin by thanking SEATINI for organizing this dialogue here today, and also to thank the presenters for their very insightful papers which they gave us today, and for sharing with us their insights. I sincerely appreciate. And I want to say that this dialogue has been timely. I appreciate that the civil society organization is engaging us in this very important subject, not at the tail end, but at the beginning. Of course, may I also hasten to add that I expect the civil society and the technocrats to be the think tanks, to be the cooks who present the ready-made food to everybody on the table. What am I talking about? What I'm saying is that I expect the civil society, having identified challenges and problems, to distill and engage us in a discussion so that we all come to an agreement on the way forward. So, since you say that this is just the very beginning of a series of dialogues, I expect that in future, the civil society will go back to the kitchen, think about where they want us to go, give us their insight, and show us the way so that we are able to internalize what they are saying and either agree or make our own amendments to what they are proposing. So today, we discussed a very important subject regarding our integration process in East Africa, particularly with a focus on facilitating trade. But may I take you a little bit back by saying that in 1963, at the inauguration of the OAU, His Excellency Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah made a call to his contemporaries. And his call was, Africa must unite. Africa must unite. And he stressed the issue of the urgency of now. Africa must unite now. I must say that Africa did not unite at that time, and to date, Africa is not yet united. It is either a betrayal on his contemporaries or those leaders who followed suit that they missed the opportunity to unite Africa. Today, we are facing the same challenge within the East African region. Many of you colleagues have already made submissions, but I want to underscore key issues that I distilled from the presentations today. One, that we must realize our commonalities and capitalize on them and downplay our differences if we are to move forward. What is it that is common to us all as Africans, as East Africans? What is it? Those are the issues that we need to capitalize on if we are to move forward. The Honorable Musira has already elaborated on one of them. We all share a common culture.
And I'm happy to say that your proposal is in tandem with my line of thinking. I also want to hasten and add that the very immediate former High Commissioner to Nairobi, who shares a blanket with me, was at the forefront of making the East Africans realize that they are one. I think on a number of occasions, she organized various cultural groups from Uganda and took them to Kenya so that they appreciate the commonality that they are one people. Similarly, she brought a number of cultural groups from Kenya to Uganda so that they would also appreciate that they are one people with the Ugandans. The ongoing pandemic of COVID should also be an eye-opener to all of us that we share a number of commonalities. The pandemic has affected trade across the board, but that should open our eyes that we need to invest together and to research together if we are to move forward. But singly, on individual country basis, we may not surmount some of the challenges that we are facing. I'm happy that my committee is almost fully represented here because you've just heard from my deputy, but also my technical person, my clerk, is in the house. So this shows you how we appreciate issues of environment, issues of climate change, issues of tapping from the abundant natural resources that our countries share to make us deliver quality of life for the people of East Africa. And we're here to work with you as partners to achieve the overall goal and mission that we intend to do. But if the people of East Africa could realize our commonalities and capitalize on them, we would definitely be able to surmount some of the challenges that have been fairly elaborated here, including what my brother Musamali said, that it is time for going to bed. And you cannot go to bed to produce children when you are still dressed up. We need to be honest with each other. As countries, honesty is very, very paramount. But that takes you back to defining what we want to achieve. What do we want to achieve? What are our commonalities? And can we capitalize on the bigger picture to achieve our desires, to achieve economic well-being, realizing that as East Africans, we are all economic dwarfs. We are all economic dwarfs. We cannot begin fighting each other. We cannot effectively compete with the superpowers, economic superpowers. So integration is the way to go. So having said that, we need to understand the context in which we are pursuing integration, capitalize on our commonalities, minimize our differences, and work on developing common legislations that will drive the integration forward. I cannot agree more, Mr. Moderator, honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a need to review the East African Community Treaty, especially the processes that we are pursuing right now. What are we doing right?
and what are we not doing right. Long ago, when I was in primary school, there is what we used to call working from first principles. I hope all of you understand working from first principles. And civil society, I want to challenge you. Help us to work from first principles and streamline this process of integration so as to promote trade and well-being of the people of East Africa. Next time we come, you should have locked yourselves in a room, thought thoroughly about what you are presenting to us, present to us the draft, say this is what we are proposing as legislators. What is your input? We take it there. Otherwise, we shall end up moving in circles and circles and circles and dragging our feet and saying this legislation has not been implemented for the past 10 years. With these very many words, I want again to congratulate all the participants today and the organizers of this dialogue for a very timely intervention in our integration process. Together, when we define our commonalities and minimize our differences, we shall surmount whatever barriers we have along the way. I thank you very, very much, and may I end here my remarks. God bless all of you.
Thank you sana, tunashukuru sana, and we can dismiss us, sir.
May I now declare this half-day dialogue officially closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.